Hello and welcome back. Today's lecture, we're going to continue our lecture series on World War One. Specifically, we had left off talking about America had entered into the war. It was necessitated by the Russian Revolution. And so now we're going to actually start to talk about the logistics of how are we going to fight this war. The first thing that comes up is we have to get our troops to Europe. We certainly don't have enough troops. We still are going to have to, get more troops. We're going to have to train troops. We're going to have to do all that. But as soon as we enter the war, the first thing we have to do is we have to get people and supplies to Great Britain, and to France. And so that's going to be a difficult thing to do because the German blockade using U-boats is so effective. They've been able to sink ships almost at will. And so to overcome this, it's going to be Admiral Sims that's really going to innovate and put into effect the convoy system. So before the convoy system, essentially what ships would do is they would scatter across the ocean and spread out and go as fast as they can across the ocean in hopes that they won't get spotted and then, converge in England or France or wherever. And so that's actually a really bad idea. It's a bad idea because as they spread out, you're actually making it easier for U-boats to accidentally run into you. And when they do, you're out there all by yourself with essentially no defenses. So what the convoy system does is it takes away both of those things. It says, you know what? If we group all of our cargo ships together in one tight group, that's actually going to hide them from the enemy. The ocean is so big, right, that if you put all of these ships together and go across the ocean, it's going to be much more difficult for a U-boat to just randomly run into you. It slows you down, and that's why they didn't do it at first, because traveling in a group slows you down. But traveling in a group hides you, and that becomes much more important. The other thing it does is when all the cargo ships are grouped like this, they're easier to defend from U-boat attacks, because what you do is you just put a series of battleships around the cargo ships. And if a U-boat pops up, those battleships are much better armored, and they're going to be able to chase off the U-boats and even sink the U-boats. If we scatter, we don't have enough battleships for each cargo ship to have a battleship. But if we group them, we can surround them, and that will help protect those ships as well as hide those ships. And so, essentially, the Germans controlled the Atlantic Ocean until we instituted the convoy system. And once we instituted the convoy system, we were able to slowly overcome the German blockade, which is going to be vital if we're going to keep Great Britain and France supplied and get all of the American troops over to Europe to fight. So it ends up becoming very, very successful. So this is kind of the route that the convoy system would take. And so they would be grouped together. And then as soon as they got to where, the blockade, that red line around is, they would then shoot off and scatter off. And that's when they would use their speed to their advantage. So convoy system, absolutely essential for the American war effort to supply Great Britain and France, and be very, very effective. Now, the other thing we need to do is we need to get enough troops. So we don't just need to get supplies over there. We have to have enough troops. The NDA, the National Defense Act, gave us about 223,000 troops. Not nearly enough. I mean, the wars, the different sides, everybody has 1 million plus. Germans have 3.5 million people fighting. 200,000, that's a drop in the bucket. So we will pass the Selective Service Act of 1917, which will register 24 million Americans. Now, registering for the Selective Service is not being drafted. It's just registering your name and giving you a number. And so to be pulled out later in what will essentially be a lottery system. 24 million people registering for the Selective Service isn't 24 million people fighting, right? So It's just putting yourself into the lottery system. We'll see that the Selective Service Act is going to require people from the age of 21 to 30 to register. We're going to have total 4.8 million served. Not all of those will be drafted. We're going to see 2.8 million soldiers actually drafted. So 4.8 million will serve. 2 million of them will be volunteer. They're going to sign up on their own, and then 2.8 will be drafted in. There's not a lot of there are some complaints about how the draft works, and we're going to be trying to figure that out all the way through the Vietnam War. But it is definitely going to be more fair than what it was during the Civil War, although you're still going to see that there are exemptions for college students and things like that, which means the burden of the draft falls on the poor. People are going to complain, poor and minorities. People are going to complain about that. But the reason that happens is that society recognizes when the war is over, we need skilled people. We need doctors. We need engineers. And if all the young people go over, nobody's going to college. When the war is over, we won't have those things for the services that we need. So kids in college get an exemption. Well, who's going to college? Tends to be the upper middle class and the wealthy, and so their children don't fight in the same numbers as poor and minority students. It's going to be a problem again during the Vietnam War. So it's a complicated issue, but it is going to get us 2.8 million more soldiers, which is what we're going to need to be able to win this war. Then we also are going to have to train those troops. So we've got them. That doesn't mean they're ready to fight. And so that's going to fall on General Pershing, General John Joseph Blackjack Pershing. His name's Blackjack. That's not a reference to the poker game, the card game. It's actually a derogatory term that he got because of his service during the Spanish-American War. General Pershing is a white guy, but during the Spanish-American War, he actually commanded black troops during that war, and his fellow officers were making fun of him and as the like, oh, you're not a real general, you're a general over black troops. And so they wanted to make fun of him in a derogatory way, and so they called him Black Jack. John Jack is a nickname for John, and Black because he commanded black troops. Well, Pershing loved his African American troops, and they were trained well. They fought bravely and heroically. They did extraordinarily well during the war, and he was very, very loyal to them. And so when people gave him the nickname Blackjack in a derogatory way, he took that term and said, I'm proud of my service with those African American troops, and I'm going to take that nickname as a sign of pride, my pride in the troops that I had worked with and fought so heroically. So he took it and spun it around on its head, and I think really kind of shows us the kind of guy that Pershing was, that he was kind of ahead of his time when it came to race relations. He also made a name for himself, chasing down Pancho Villa in Mexico recently, and so has a great reputation as a military commander, and he is going to be put in charge. He's going to be made the supreme commander of the American army in France. So he's in charge of the American troops in France. This is going to kind of upset the British and the French. They wanted the American troops to fall under the command of British and French officers that had already been fighting and had experience. But Wilson's like, no way. American troops are going to not be under the command of foreign military leaders. And so General Pershing gets put in charge, and that's fortuitous. That's a good thing, because Pershing recognizes that his troops aren't ready. And so he comes up with a plan to get them ready. And essentially, His plan is to spend the first year of the war just training, which is really going to upset the British and the French because they want America to get involved right away to relieve the pressure on them. But Pershing says, no, I'm not going to throw my men. Like, he saw what happened to the British and the French when they weren't prepared for war. They were slaughtered. And so he's like, I'm not going to do that to my American soldiers, which is going to make him a beloved commander because he's not just throwing away their lives casually. So the first year of the war, that America was in, right? So, 1917 to 1918, Americans spent most of their time training and would only back up the British and the French, right? The last year of the war, after 1918, the French and the British just are too exhausted. And that's when Pershing realizes the American troops are trained enough. And that's when the American forces start to do the majority of the fighting. And so, thanks to Pershing, the Americans won't be fighting before they're ready to fight. And so, leadership was instrumental in American success and in keeping American casualties, as low as they were, and they will be relatively low. Although it's a kind of we're still going to have over 100,000 Americans die in this war. So at the same time, it is not just our soldiers that are going to help win this war. It's going to be our wartime production. We're going to outproduce Germany, and this is, I think, the underrated thing about American involvement in World War I and World War II. We don't do most of the fighting in either one of those wars, although we get the credit for that. We are instrumental in winning those wars, and our soldiers are a big part of that. But more importantly than that, it's our industrial production. When we turn our industrial capacity to making bullets and guns and boots and providing food for soldiers, nobody can match us. Our system of capitalism and at this point regulated capitalism has made our economy so strong that we're at the point now that no other economy can compete. We are light years ahead of other nations economically, and that starts during World War I and World War I's production, and we're just vastly superior economically, and so we can make more stuff than anybody else in the world. And so that is going to keep the British and the French in the fight. The convoy system is going to help protect the stuff that we make. Just making it doesn't matter if you can't get it where it's going. And so the convoy system will do that. And then Pershing's leadership is going to be instrumental in, America's impact in this war. Okay, that is where we are going to end our lecture for today. Thank you very much for your time, and I will see you again shortly.